I would rather be first in a village than second in Rome. It is the morning of March 15th and the most powerful man in Rome has about 4 hours left. He conquered Gaul, he crossed the Rubicon, he made himself dictator for life. He is, by any measure anyone in the ancient world would use, the most successful person alive. And this afternoon, 60 men are going to be waiting for him in a room with no guards. One of them owes him his life. Caesar captured him in a war, forgave him, promoted him and treated him like family. So here's the question this video is actually about. Not how it happened, you already know how it happened. The question is, why 60 successful men decided that removing one person would fix their country? Because they were wrong. And the way they were wrong is one of the strangest stories in history. Over the next few minutes I'm going to show you the whole thing. How a broke young man with a famous last name and no money ended up owning the largest empire on earth. Why one small river was the point of no return. Why chasing his rival ended with a gift he couldn't look at. And what he did with total power once he finally had it. Which is not what you would expect. Some of it you are still using today. Right now, this year. Some of it made the men closest to him decide he had to go. And at the end, I'll show you the part almost nobody talks about. What happened after. What those 60 men actually got. Because they got the opposite of what they wanted. Now let's start about 50 years earlier when Caesar was nobody. To understand why anyone wanted him gone, you have to understand one thing about Rome. Rome did not have a king. And Romans were not casually against kings the way you might be against a sports team. They were against kings the way you are against house fires. 400 years earlier they had thrown their last king out and they built the entire government around one idea. Never let one person stay on top. So, they made everything short and shared. The top job, consul, was held by 2 men at the same time, so each one could block the other. And you only got it for 1 year, then you handed it back. Every important job was like that. 2 people, 1 year, then out. The Senate sat above all of it. Not really a lawmaking body, more like a room full of Rome's most experienced men whose opinion was so heavy it worked like a law. And it held for centuries. That's the part people skip. The system was old and it worked. Now, here's the crack that nobody noticed in time. By the time Caesar was born, Rome had gotten enormous. It owned Spain, Greece, North Africa, big parts of Turkey. And an empire that size needs armies standing far away for years at a time. Those armies stopped being paid by the state in any way that mattered. They were paid by their general in loot, in land, in bonuses when they retired. So, if you were a soldier, the man who fed you and made you rich wasn't Rome. It was the guy on the horse in front of you. Rome had built a system to stop one man from taking over. Then it accidentally created dozens of small private armies whose loyalty had a name and a face. That's the machine Caesar walked into. He didn't invent it, he just used it better than anyone ever had. Caesar was born into a family called the Julii, ancient name, supposedly descended from a goddess, extremely impressive at parties. Also, no money and no power. The family hadn't produced anyone important in generations. He grew up in a rough neighborhood in Rome, not on a hill in a mansion. He was about 18 when the trouble started. Rome was in the middle of one of its civil wars and a general named Sulla won it. Sulla then did something Rome had never seen. He took the emergency job called dictator, which was supposed to last 6 months in a crisis, and he used it to hunt down his enemies by name. He posted lists in public. If your name was on the list you were finished, and whoever found you got paid. Caesar was married to the daughter of Sulla's biggest rival, so Sulla sent a simple order: divorce her. Everyone divorced her, that was the correct answer, it cost you nothing. Caesar said no. He lost his inheritance, lost his priesthood, and had to hide in a countryside, moving every night while sick with a fever. Friends of his family spent months begging Sulla to let it go. Sulla eventually did, and according to the story, he warned them they were making a mistake, because he saw many ambitious men inside that one young man. Hold on to that moment. An 18-year-old looked at the most dangerous person in the country and calculated that backing down would cost him more than being hunted. That is not bravery exactly, it's a very cold kind of math. And he does it again and again for the next 30 years. There's one more story from these years, and it's real. In his 20s, sailing across the Aegean, Caesar was captured by pirates. They demanded 20 talents of silver for his return. He laughed at them, he told them they clearly had no idea who they'd caught, and he insisted they raise the price to 50. Then he spent almost 40 days as their prisoner, acting like their boss. He made them keep quiet when he wanted to sleep. He wrote poems and speeches and read them out loud to the crew, and when they weren't impressed he called them uneducated and told them cheerfully that he was going to come back and finish them once he was free. They thought it was hilarious. The ransom got paid, he was released. He immediately borrowed ships, sailed straight back, found them still camped at the same island and captured every one of them. He was still a nobody, he had no army and no office. He just seemed to have decided very early that the normal limits on a person were a suggestion. Here's the part that most tellings leave out, and it's the engine of everything that follows. Roman politics ran on money. Not a little absurd amounts. To move up you had to be elected, and to be elected you gave the public things. Free grain, gladiator games, festivals, public buildings with your name on them. That was the job interview. Caesar spent like a man who had already decided to win. He threw games so big people were still talking about them years later. He fixed a major road out of his own pocket. He ran for the religious office in Rome, a lifetime position, and reportedly bribed so heavily that on the morning of the vote he told his mother he'd either come home as the high priest or not come home at all, because if he lost he could never show his face against those debts. He won, but by his late 30s Caesar owed sums that are hard to describe. Modern estimates put his debts in the range of hundreds of millions in today's money. When he was assigned to govern Spain, his creditors physically tried to stop him from leaving the city, because a man leaving with that much debt looks a lot like a man running. Brings in the second character, Crassus, the richest man in Rome and possibly the richest private citizen in the ancient world. He made his fortune in a way that tells you everything. Rome had no real fire service, so when a building caught fire, Crassus would show up with a crew and offer to buy it cheap, right now, while it burned. If you said yes, his men put out the fire. If you said no, they watched. Crassus paid off enough of Caesar's debt to get him out of Rome, because Crassus collected promising men the way other people collect property. And the third, Pompey, the most famous soldier alive. He had cleared the Mediterranean of pirates in about 3 months, conquered the East, and been given the nickname the Great, which to be fair he gave himself first. In 60 BC these 3 men made a private deal. Caesar would run for consul, Crassus would fund it. Pompey would supply the public support and the veterans. And once Caesar was in the office, he would push through the laws the other 2 needed and couldn't get past the Senate. No title, no announcement, just 3 men who between them controlled the money, the soldiers and the law, deciding to stop competing. To seal it, Caesar married his only daughter Julia to Pompey, a man about 24 years older than her and his own political rival. Remember Julia, she matters more than almost anyone in the story and she never gets a scene. Caesar got his year as consul in 59 BC. It was aggressive enough that people joked about the year of Julius and Caesar, because his co-consul gave up and stayed home. But a consul only serves 12 months. What he really wanted was what came next, a province. Because governing a province meant 3 things. You commanded an army, you could take wealth out of the region, and this is the important one, while you held the command, you could not be out on trial back in Rome. He got Gaul, roughly modern France, Belgium, Switzerland with Germany across the river. He stayed 8 years, and the scale of it is genuinely hard to hold in your head. He fought dozens of tribes, invaded Britain twice, bridged the Rhine in about 10 days purely to prove he could, then walked back across and took the bridge apart. Ancient writers say 1 million people were captured and 1 million more did not survive it. Those numbers come from a world with no census, and some come from Caesar himself, so treat them as an impression rather than a measurement. But even the careful modern estimates describe one of the deadliest campaigns in ancient history. The single most impressive thing he ever did happened here, at a hilled fort called Alesia in 52 BC. The Gauls had finally united under one leader, Vercingetorix, a bit difficult to pronounce, and he pulled his army inside the fort. Caesar surrounded the hill with a ring of walls, ditches and traps facing inward to starve them out. Then he learned a relief army was coming. Reportedly 250,000 men, to hit him from behind. He had two options, retreat or split his force. He did neither. He built a second wall, a complete outer ring, facing the opposite direction with his own army sandwiched in the corridor between the two. Roughly 25 miles of fortification. Built while under attack, he was besieging and besieged at the same time, and he won both fights on the same afternoon. And here's the part that people forget. Caesar wrote about all of this himself. Every year he sent reports back to Rome in clean, simple language, describing his own campaigns in the third person. Caesar ordered, Caesar advanced, as if written by a neutral observer. They were read out loud in the city. They made him a celebrity. He was fighting a war and running a publicity campaign at the same time, and the publicity campaign might have been the more important one. Meanwhile, back home the deal was falling apart. In 54 BC, Julia, his daughter, Pompey's wife, died in childbirth. The family tie between the two most powerful men in Rome was gone. A year later, Crassus, chasing military glory to match the other, marched east and was destroyed at Carrhae. The money was gone too. 3 men had balanced each other, now there were 2, and 2 men who both want to be the first is not a balance, it's a countdown. By 50 BC, Caesar's enemies in the Senate had found the perfect trap. Not a military one, a legal one. The rule was simple. You couldn't hold command inside Italy and you couldn't be persecuted while holding office. So they ordered him to give up his army and come home as a private citizen, and made it clear that the moment he did, he'd be put on trial for everything from his consulship onward, with the outcome already arranged. So his choices were: give up the army and lose everything he had built, or keep it and be declared an enemy of the state. Pompey, now firmly on the Senate side, wasn't worried. He famously said that if he stamped his foot in Italy, soldiers would rise out of the ground. On January 10, 49 BC, Caesar stood at a small river in northern Italy called the Rubicon. Not impressive, you could wade it. But it was the legal border. South of it, no general was allowed to bring troops, ever. Crossing it with an army wasn't a battle, it was by definition a declaration of war on his own government. He had 1 legion with him. Pompey had the entire Roman state. He crossed anyway, and the line the sources give him is a gambler's line. The die is cast. The dice are already in the air. There's nothing left to decide. And then the most surprising thing in the war happened. Nothing. Cities opened their gates, nobody stamped their foot. Pompey and most of the Senate ran, out of Rome, out of Italy, across to Greece. Caesar walked into the capital of the world without a fight, and found the treasury still sitting there. The war that followed took 4 years and covered 3 continents. He beat a larger army in Greece by aiming his best troops at the faces of Pompey's young cavalry, because he'd guessed correctly that rich young men would rather run than get scared. Pompey escaped to Egypt expecting shelter. Egypt's court did a math on who was winning and made a decision. When Caesar arrived, they presented him with Pompey's head as a welcome gift. The sources say he turned away and wept. Whether that was grief or performance, nobody can tell you. And honestly, with Caesar, those two things were rarely separate. He stayed in Egypt far longer than the war required, backed Cleopatra against her brother, and eventually had a son with her. Then he went to Turkey, crushed a rebellion so fast that his report back to Rome was 3 words. I came, I saw, I conquered. By 45 BC there was nobody left to fight, and for the first time in 400 years 1 man held Rome completely. Now here's where the story stops behaving the way you'd expect. Because a man who takes over a country by force is supposed to start settling scores. That's the pattern. Sulla did it, everyone did it. Caesar did the opposite. He announced a policy of clemency, mercy. He pardoned his enemies, not quietly and not once. Senators who had fought against him, taken up arms against him, funded armies against him were forgiven and given their positions back, including a man named Marcus Brutus who had fought for Pompey. Caesar pardoned him, promoted him, and made him governor of a province. And then he started fixing things at a speed that must have been genuinely alarming to watch. He resettled tens of thousands of poor citizens and retired soldiers into new colonies, which cut the crowding in Rome and gave them land. He restructured debts to stop the country from tearing itself apart. He extended Roman citizenship to communities far outside Italy, including people the old families thought of as foreigners. He put doctors and teachers on the citizenship track. He planned to drain marshland and dig a canal. And he fixed the calendar. The old Roman year had drifted so badly that the harvest festivals were landing in the wrong season. Caesar brought in astronomers throughout the guesswork and rebuilt the entire year around the sun. 365 days, one extra day every fourth year. To reset it, the year 46 BC had to be stretched to 445 days. People at the time called it the longest year in history. That calendar ran Europe for over 1500 years, and the version you use right now is a light edit of it. Every February 29th is his. So, reforms, mercy, competence. Why would anyone want him gone? Because of what was happening alongside all of it. He was made dictator, then dictator again, then dictator for 10 years, and in February 44 BC dictator for life, the emergency job with no end date. He put his own face on Roman coins while he was still alive, something Rome had never done for a living person. His statue was placed amongst the old kings. He was given a golden chair, a special title, a personal priest. He expanded the Senate to about 900 members, filling it with his own supporters, including men from the provinces. The senators he added were loyal. The senators already there watched a room where their voice used to carry get flooded until it didn't. More chairs, less power. And then the crown thing. At a public festival in front of a crowd, Mark Antony walked up and offered him a king's crown. Caesar pushed it away. Antony offered it again. He pushed it away again and the crowd cheered. Nobody could agree on what they just seen. Was he refusing a crown or testing the room to see how loud the cheering was? The ambiguity is the whole problem. He hadn't abolished the republic. Elections still happened. The Senate still met. All the furniture was there. He'd simply arranged things so that none of it functioned without him. The plot involved something like 60 men. They called themselves the Liberators. And the strangest fact about them is that a large share had been pardoned by Caesar personally. They were alive because of his mercy, and they decided that his mercy was the proof of the problem, because the power to forgive you is the power of a king. Two names led it: Cassius, sharp, resentful, and the actual organizer, and Brutus, who mattered for one reason: his family. Brutus was said to descend from the man who threw out Rome's last king 4 centuries earlier. That founding story was his last name. People used that against him. Someone left notes on his chair. Someone wrote on the statue of his famous ancestor, "If only you were alive now." Brutus was being asked in public whether he was going to live up to a name he hadn't chosen. He joined. The warnings in the story are famous and worth telling exactly as ancient writers give them, because they knew a good story too. A fortune teller named Spurina reportedly told him to be careful of the Ides of March, the 15. His wife Calpurnia had a nightmare and begged him not to go. Someone pressed a written note into his hand on the way in and he kept it unread in his left hand. He went anyway, and here's the detail that says the most about him. He had already dismissed his personal bodyguard. He'd been told about plots before. He'd said publicly that it was better to face danger once than to live in fear of it every day. The meeting was at a hall attached to the theater of Pompey. They surrounded him with a petition. One of them pulled his toga down from his shoulder, and the men who had been waiting closed in. 23 wounds according to the doctor who examined him afterward. Only one of them was serious enough to matter. He did not leave that room, and the sources note where he came to rest. At the base of a statue of Pompey, the rival he'd chased across the world. Now the famous line, Et tu, Brute. He almost certainly never said it. That's Shakespeare, written more than 1500 years later. Some historical sources claim that he spoke a few words in Greek to Brutus, closer to you to my child. The most quoted last words in history are probably a line of English theatre. So, the tyrant is gone, the Republic is free, that was the plan. Here's what happened instead. The conspirators walked out into the street holding up their hands and shouting that Rome was free again, and the streets emptied. People shut their windows, there was no celebration, nobody had been asked. And then the plan ran out, because there wasn't one. They had thought carefully about removing one man and had spent almost no time on the morning after. Mark Antony filled that gap in about 2 days. He got permission to hold a public funeral. He read out Caesar's will, which left his private gardens to the people of Rome as a public park, and a cash gift to every citizen in the city. The crowd burned the conspirators' houses. Brutus and Cassius left the city and never really came back to it. Then Caesar's will produced its second surprise. His main heir was an 18-year-old great-nephew almost nobody had heard of, Gaius Octavius, Octavian. Everyone underestimated him. Antony called him a boy who owed everything to a name. That boy would go on to outmaneuver every single one of them. Within 18 months, Octavian, Antony, and a third man had taken formal control of the state and published their own lists of enemies. In 42 BC, at Philippine Greece, the last army of the liberators lost. Brutus and Cassius did not survive the defeat, both by their own hand. Then Octavian and Antony turned on each other, as everyone should have expected by now. Actium 31 BC, Antony and Cleopatra lost, and Egypt became Roman property. And in 27 BC, Octavian stood in front of the Senate and offered to hand back all his powers. The Senate begged him to keep them. They gave him a new name, Augustus. He never called himself king, he called himself first citizen. He kept the elections, kept the Senate, kept every piece of furniture Caesar had kept. And he ruled for 41 years and handed the whole thing to an heir. That's the empire. It runs, in one form or another, for the next 500 years in the west and 1500 in the east. So let's do the accounting. 60 men decided that removing one person would restore the republic. The republic outlived Caesar by about 17 years. It never held another free election that mattered. The man who did it lost, and the great nephew nobody had heard of took the thing. They were trying to prevent and made it permanent, with public approval. And I think the reason is the thing we set up at the start. The republic was already broken before Caesar was born. Its armies belonged to generals, its elections were bought. Political violence in the street was normal for a generation. Caesar didn't cause that. He was the first person to fully understand what the broken version could be used for. Removing him didn't repair the machine, it just proved the machine could be settled with knives, and then it created a vacancy that a smarter man walked into. Which leaves one uncomfortable question, and I'll leave it with you rather than answer it. If a republic can only be saved by removing one man in a room without a trial, was it still a republic that morning? The liberators wanted history to remember them as the man who stopped the king, and they lost that too, because Caesar's name didn't end with him. Augustus took it, every emperor after took it. It stopped being a family name and turned into the word for a ruler. It traveled into German as Kaiser, into Russian as Tsar. He refused the crown in public twice in front of a crowd, and then his name became the word for king in half the languages of Europe. We are also still living inside his calendar, and the month you call July was renamed for him by the Senate. The year before the Ides